Pessoal, hoje nós estamos aqui iniciando um projeto que vai ser muito interessante aqui para o canal, que eu sempre tive também vontade de realizar, que é relacionado à contação de histórias, relacionadas ao mundo da mitologia nórdica, relacionados ao folclore escandinavo também, ao folclore dessas regiões também, da qual os vikings passaram. E foi muito interessante porque eu conversando com o Mr. Mooney sobre essas questões das histórias, né, ele até contou comigo e falou, olha, se você quiser, a gente pode fazer algo de contação de história. E é muito legal porque além dele vai vir mais duas pessoas também que ele conhece, que são especializados nessa área, e a gente vai conhecer um pouco mais dessas histórias, e eu estou assim, super empolgada, porque vai ser feito, né? Lá vocês vão ter a playlist lá no canal, em que eu vou dividir ela, por exemplo, a playlist em 3 livros, no caso o nome vai ser Book 1, Book 2 e Book 3, e aí vai ser de acordo com esses contadores de história que vão estar nos falando sobre essas como é que eu posso dizer, todas essas histórias que foram passadas de geração em geração, que são contadas até hoje. Então, eu vou começar aqui passando a palavra para ele, e nós vamos ter a contação agora de 3 histórias que fazem parte desse universo. Mr. Mui, thank you so much for accepting being here again in the channel and be here part of this project of stories and folk tales related to the Viking Age and related to the regions of the Vikings are like Orkney Islands. And you can start, tell us the stories, and we are excited for this.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be back. This story is called Why the Sea is Salt. And it is actually a Viking tale because it was written by a poet called Bragi Bodlinson, who is known as Bragi the Skald. It was written sometime around about 850 AD, and it was part of a much older story, because when he wrote the poem, it was only about part of what the story contained. But people would have recognized it. They would have known the story. Stories were passed down from generation to generation and were well known. Snorri Sturluson wrote this down in his Edda as well, the same story, only that was, 400 years later almost. So it was a well-known story in the Viking Age. Now, there was once a king in Denmark called King Frodi, and Frodi lived about 2,000 years ago. And during his reign, there was a time of great peace and plenty. But it wasn't always like that. Now, during the reign of Frodi, he found a quernstone. Quernstones are millstones. They're big round flat stones with a hole in the top that you drop the grain through to grind it into flour, and it has to be turned by hand. But this quern was called groti, and groti was huge. It was an immense thing, and no one could turn it. But King Frodi had it brought back to his castle, and it was put in a room and left. Now, he had gone to visit his friend, the King of Sweden, and while he was there, he saw that the Swedish king had 2 slave women, bond maidens, they referred to them, but slaves. But they weren't mortal women. These were giants, immense, huge women, and they were called Fenja and Menja. Now, Frodi asked the Swedish king if he could buy them from him. And he agreed, and a price was settled, and he bought Fenja and Menja, and he brought them back to Denmark with him. And he took them to the castle, and he took them to the room where Grotti, the huge quernstone, lay. And he said, I want you to turn that quernstone for me. Because Grotti was no ordinary quernstone, it was magic, and it would grind whatever the owner wished for. And so he said to them, I want you to start turning the quernstone and grind for me gold. I want gold. So Fenja and Menja started to turn that huge quernstone, and they were so big that they were able to do this. And as they turned the stones, the gold flowed out from between the two stones. And Frodi had his men gather it up, and they carried it away, and they put it in the treasury. And when that was full, they filled other rooms with gold as well, until Frodi had so much gold that he was the richest man in the world. And he didn't need any more gold, so he told them to stop grinding gold for him. And now he wished for something else. He wished for peace and plenty and prosperity and fertility for the land and all the people who lived in it. And so Fenja and Menja turned Grotti, the huge quernstone, round and round and round, and you couldn't see anything flowing out from between those two stones. But what was coming out was good luck and peace and prosperity. And the land was transformed. There was no wars. There was no fighting. Even people, no one quarreled even. There was no disputes. And all the stalks of corn hung heavy with the seeds on it. There was so much corn. And the barley, the wheat, all grew heavy on the stalk. The branches of the trees hung from the weight of fruit that hung from them. All the animals had twins, the cows, the sheep, the horses all had twins, twin calves, twin lambs, twin foals. And there was so many fish in the sea that you could have practically walked from Denmark across to Norway on the backs of the herring. There were so many fish in the sea. And everybody was happy and contented, and it was known as the Peace of Frodi. And everyone was happy, except for two people, Fenja and Menja, who had to turn the quernstone night and day, and they were tired. So they asked King Frodi if they could rest. And he said, you can only rest for as long as a cuckoo will hold its peace, or long enough for a song to be sung. They didn't like that answer. And so Fenja and Menja started to sing a song, and it was a terrible song. It was known as Grotesunger, the song of the Lay of Grotti. And what they sang was bad luck and hate and famine and disease and pestilence for the land. An army invaded the borders of Denmark. People started to quarrel and started to fight. Father killed son, daughter killed mother. And all the crops failed and rotted in the fields. The trees as well were barren, the fruit rotted, and there was no fish in the sea either. And people started to starve. And also disease broke out as well and started to kill people. One day, a sea king called Misinger sailed in his longship up to the land of Frodi and right up to the harbor of the city where his castle was. And Mazinger and his men attacked the castle, and they killed King Frodi's bodyguard, and they killed King Frodi himself as well. And then, after taking lots of his gold, they carried away Fenja and Menja as well, and the millstone Groti. Now, Mazinger knew what this quernstone could do. And so, as they sailed away in his longship, he ordered them to grind them salt. Now, salt was a very valuable commodity in those days. It wasn't easy to get. So they started to turn the quernstone, and salt flowed from between the two stones. After a while, they said to Mazinger, "Have you had enough salt yet?" And he said, "No, keep turning, keep grinding out salt." So they did. And in a very short time, the amount of salt flowing out filled the ship, and it became too heavy, and it sank to the bottom of the sea. Now, Mazinger and his men were drowned, but Fenja and Menja weren't, because they were of the race of giants. They were not mortal like us. And so they still turn the quernstone at the bottom of the sea. And where the ship sank lay between the Orkney Islands and the coast of Scotland. And next to an island called Stroma, which lies halfway across the Pentland Firth, there is a whirlpool called the Swelky. In Old Norse, it was Svelgar, and it meant swallower, because it swallowed ships whole. But that whirlpool is caused by the water flowing down through the eye in the middle of the quernstone, the hole that you drop the grain through, and the turning action of the quern at the bottom of the sea. And Fenja and Menja are still there, and they still grind salt, and that is why the sea is salty. So that is a story from, almost 1,200 years ago, but it would go back further. As I said, people recognize
that's so sad. They die.
Yes, but Fenja and Menja don't. They're still down there turning out the salt. And as anybody like myself that lives on an island knows, the sea is very salty. And that whirlpool is still there. The Swelky, it's not as dangerous as it was, but it did cause shipwrecks. And it did cause civil war in Orkney once, because the Earl of Orkney was killed, and all his family set off in pursuit of the killers, who went to Norway. And when they were returning, all of them were in the one ship, and they got caught by the waters of the Swelky, the Svelgar, the swallower, and the ship went down in the whirlpool and was lost with all on board. And so there was no one left to be Earl of Orkney. So there was all the different rival claims coming in. So the Swelky is not to be trifled with. Now,
that's very interesting. I think I listened this story. I don't remember when, but when you told about the giants, Vinny and Finian, I remember from and when I saw that both of them are slaves for him and don't be happy in any time of her life. It was broken my heart, because they was, how can I say, treated like an object for many.
Yeah,
that was so sad. And they died like in a boat. That was.
But like I said, they weren't mortal, so they're still there at the bottom of the sea, still alive, still turning the quernstone. So